overnight, I became kind of like the head of this like Visa Global sponsorship agency business.
Well, you've had this opportunity to work at some of the largest sports companies and get involved with them on a global scale. I mean, is this something that you thought you'd ever be involved with, or how did this whole journey happen?
I wish I had the foresight, Wayne. But yes, I've been incredibly fortunate. Yeah, I mean, quickly, like a lot of people I feel like I talk to in the sports industry today, I was one of those people who was an athlete, but not good enough to pursue a professional career. I was a tennis player, and coming from Toronto, Canada, one of the things I came upon, right, I realized that I was not going D1. I tried. They didn't really seem to think I had the skills, but was focused on D3 and came across a school in Kalamazoo, Michigan, Kalamazoo College, that has to be the only school in the country, if not the planet, that has a bigger tennis stadium than football stadium. And the reason why that is every year they host the junior nationals for boys, 16s and 18s. So if you go back to coming out of high school, pre-internet, the way that the agents recruited the athletes was by going there. I was like, okay, while they're recruiting the athletes, I'm going to recruit them. I'm going to get a job, be a sports agent. That's my thing. And I did, right? I mean, I was lucky enough, back in the day, in Kalamazoo College, played tennis there, and I ended up getting a job. There were three big agencies, IMG, Advantage that morphed into Octagon, and then ProServe. And so I got a job at ProServe, was my first foray into kind of like very minor league tennis agency life, and realized that that was not the path, because I didn't want my life to be controlled by 19-year-olds and running around the country focusing solely on them. So that was how I started my career. When I
But Mark,
realized,
before you leave that, I
yes,
mean, we hear that from a lot of agents, and some of which continue to go on and I guess in many ways carry the bags for those 19-year-olds, and then when they get older and take them along the way. But what was that like? I mean, actually, what are you really doing for an athlete when you're an agent?
oh, it's a great question. So this is what I learned, right? I mean, a lot of it, I had visions, I think like a lot of people, of like, oh, David Falk, right? You're doing Michael Jordan deals. And I tell people, everyone had Michael Jordan on their wall. I had David Falk, right? That was my vision. What you realize is that is such the 0.1% of what it is. What the job really is managing all the business and operation aspects of a player's life. And so in tennis, right, where God, even now only I think the top 150 or so are at a break-even basis, you're desperate to find ways to save money, to get them to tournaments where they can possibly win a couple rounds and find some endorsement deals. I mean, one of the ones we had the most fun with back in the day were the Jensen brothers, who were two rock and roll tennis brothers, right? And they would show up wearing jerseys, they would show up on motorcycles. We actually had a lot of fun. But the job for me was, all the maintenance for dealing with autographs, kind of like hotel rooms that had been busted up, like finding lost rental cars. I looked at the people who are our age now and was like, wow, this is what they do all day, every day for 30 years. And I couldn't imagine that being my future, right? Even though getting to work at a tennis agent seemed like a glamorous ride.
So then what happened next?
So I came across the Tulane sports law program. And again, remember pre-internet, right? This was not known that there were all these sports programs. So I was like, okay, people respect lawyers. I will do that. My parents will, gotta be like, okay with this path. So I went to Tulane law, and I showed up in New Orleans, having never been to New Orleans, didn't really know much about it. And it was like, oh, wow, this place is special. And so quickly, in starting law school, I realized that I wasn't put on this planet to be a lawyer. I think I like making things up more than I like knowing things. And so I kind of also, took the GMATs, took the MBA, so did a joint JD MBA program, but really was focused on just getting a job in sports. And I tell people, like, while a lot of people were studying, right, and that, I was like, how do I get a job in sports? And, and that. So I did every internship I could find. I worked at the New Orleans Saints. I did some stuff with Tulane when I was there, worked at the NFLPA and then IMG, all the while saying, hey, grades are secondary. What I just need to do is figure out how do I leverage this background of interest and passion into a job, right? Because that's ultimately the only goal. And so fortunately enough, after a couple unpaid internships at IMG, they hired me out of law school, and they kept trying to say, oh, you can go on our legal group. I was like, absolutely not, right? Don't let me do that. But what they said was that, and this was some advice I had learned at ProServe as well, was like, the way you keep a job in sports is by making people money, right? Very simple, but like learn how to sell. So I had to learn how to sell. So my first jobs at IMG were very much at the base level of like selling properties, selling athletes, selling sponsorships. In the beginning, you're just putting together presentations for the older salespeople. Then you kind of like get to fly on your own a little bit. And I carved a niche out. Most people at IMG at the time were focused on some of the big glamour things like golf and tennis. And I was able to authentically connect with some younger sports. So US Open is surfing we own. So I'd focus on doing deals with that, or things around some of our action sports athletes like Shaun White. And so really got some traction in a kind of different niche. And also, did a number of deals in the video game space as well, which really helped to set my career, at least at IMG, for a while.
Fascinating. And then you were able to parlay that into working with the NFL?
Yeah, I think the transition that happened was IMG, I was there for about half the time under Marc McCormick, which was a very entrepreneurial run company at the time. And then unfortunately Marc passed away and we were taken over by Forstmann Little. Not that was unfortunate, that was phenomenal education. Because it had been, you do a deal and people are like, great, we did a deal, we made some money. Forstmann Little came in and said, well, hold on, what's EBITDA on that deal? And where are we focusing on areas and things that I had to go back to all those MBA classes I took. I was like, oh, wow, different kind of business, but a different lens.
Right.
That time, IMG had wanted to grow the consulting side of the business. And so I was, kind of like challenged with growing consulting on the West Coast. And what you learned, if you sold a consulting deal, you also became a consultant, right? It's not like there was a differentiation. You're now a consultant. So we were quite fortunate. We won some amazing accounts, kind of the ones that come to mind. Kia Motors, if you look at the NBA, we initially designed that strategy for them to, help them improve their brand perception with the NBA. The quality hadn't been great. It had improved significantly, but consumers didn't realize that. So we built an NBA program that included elements like the performance awards. So now you've got like Kobe Bryant and LeBron James with Kia, right, changing the dynamic of that brand. So that was one of the fun ones. But the one that was most influential was we won Visa's global sponsorship business. So overnight, I became kind of like the head of this like Visa global kind of sponsorship agency business that was, they had the Olympics, they had the NFL, they had the Rugby World Cup, and we ended up working with them and acquiring the FIFA World Cup rights. And that set me on a path because all of a sudden my job is now completely global. I'm learning about different sports and set the trajectory for why I am now, an international man of mystery. So yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it's so interesting to hear, being able to work with a brand that is global, that then, gives you that opportunity to really expand all the things that, just help you with your personal journey, right? And everything you've done because of that, because having a client like a Visa and being able to then go around the world with them.
Yeah, no. And look, that was kind of the trigger, right? Having also worked with the NFL at times when the NFL, and so this goes back to 2010, when the NFL decided to get serious about growing internationally, right? Because I'd had both experience on the US side and the international side, I joined the NFL as the first ever international commercial director. And basically what that meant was grow the fan base internationally and monetize it, right? That was the brief. And it's funny, right? Day one, 2010, they're like, hey, we want to focus on building a fan base in the UK so that we could potentially put a team there between 2020 and 2022. Right? That was literally like the day one brief. And, and how do you attack that? Up until then, they had 5 markets of focus that were Canada, Mexico, UK, China, Japan, but no real organized strategy. It wasn't clear as to how we were going to actually grow a global business other than 5 markets that were of interest because they could be monetized. And so that was a lot of the work. So for 5-6 years, that's what I focused on. How do we do it? And one of the things, you learned, and the history I found was fascinating, but what people in these markets were real, authentic NFL fans when you talk to them. But what they wanted was the real thing. They didn't want has-beens or never will-be's. They wanted the authentic product. And so that led to the idea of, driving more games than just a one-off game once a year in Wembley, right? Really making this there, it drove to, okay, we have to have fans care about a team. So that led to, hey, we're going to make one team, which at the time initially was the St. Louis Rams, interestingly, and then became the Jaguars because the Rams were sued by the city because they couldn't take home games away from St. Louis. But how do you build that connectivity? And another thing that we really focused on was that if you follow soccer at all, if anyone here, pricing for tickets of professional sports in England is very different, right? You can really not get beyond 35 quid, pounds per game if you're talking a Premier League game right now. Whereas we were charging over £100 per ticket for the NFL. How do you do that? So you have to give people a great day out, right? So we really focused on, it doesn't matter, it's not as much what happens on the field. How do we give people a phenomenal day? So adding tailgate, adding music, adding events so that we really gave people a fantastic experience and they would, clamor for tickets. And ultimately that strategy, worked to build that fan base.